We know that cost of living, number one issue for the country. 93% of people say it's their number one issue. It should be the focus of the federal government, but we all know that ain't happening anytime soon. Relentlessly, the polls say voters care more about cost of living as opposed to dramatic changes when it comes to climate change. And as we've also been pointing out, what you've been living for a while, petrol is starting to go through the roof. Petrol is one of the basket of goods, which means inflation, which has gone up in the past month, will most likely go up again in the next quarter. If inflation keeps going up, the Reserve Bank has one option and one option only. Rates go up. Now, as you know, petrol in particular, despite the fact that this month apparently the inflation rate, while slightly up, 0.3%, it doesn't really matter. The reality is in petrol, it's up 13.9, almost 14%. Thankfully, there are people in the political establishment who are willing to call out to the government, hey, you are in a position to drop the price of petrol. You can do what the previous government did, which is to pull back the amount that you take in tax. Di Lee, the independent member for Fowler, the one who truly scares the Labor Party because local people turn to locals like her rather than blow-ins like Christina Keneally. Well, she has said today that financially the change in petrol is killing people and the government needs to do something. But guess what? Despite the fact that they have $22 billion extra than they plan to spend on everything that they have already committed this and every other future government to spending, so much so that we will be in deficit, running one every single year, maybe not next year, but every single year for the next 40 years. There is a structural deficit in Australia where, put simply, we spend more than we earn. And it'll be apparently the case again when an extra 20 million people live in the country and we've got 40 million people living here in 2060 or 2062. Well, guess what happened today? Jim Chalmers, when asked about this today, said, no, we can't do it. We've got no cash. Mate, you've got 22 billion more right now. I'm not talking about it permanently, but if it's only $3 billion for every 6 months, I reckon you might be able to give us just a little bit of a reprieve for the next 6 months, maybe even, God forbid, 12 months. It would hardly send the country broke. In fact, it's the cream on top of the cake already. What was that promise that they made? Remember, pay attention to what governments do, not what they say. A Labor government will lower the cost of living. Instead, it goes up, it goes up, it goes up. And of course, remember, this is an issue that Anthony Albanese knows is an issue that people care about. Why? Because it was a point that he was making way back when petrol was under $2 a litre. The point that he was making back in 2021 was that clearly out-of-touch Scott Morrison doesn't pay enough attention to the petrol prices, something that he himself had later admitted because he, of course, doesn't have to fill his car anymore and will never for the rest of his life because he's now on Easy Street. Remember, he turned around and said, do you reckon Scott Morrison has been to a petrol station recently? Petrol prices are surging on his watch. It was $1.79 back then when things were apparently outrageous. It's now well over $2 in most parts of the country. And it's something, of course, that the Labor Party was more than happy to talk about when they were in opposition, when they had no responsibility and they didn't have $22 billion extra to be able to give you just a little relief. This was what they said.
The cost of petrol.
All around Middle Australia, petrol prices skyrocketing.
Costs of petrol.
Prices of everything from petrol to groceries going up and up and up.
This election he's lying about petrol prices.
In denial about petrol prices increasing, that we're approaching $2 a litre.
So the sky was falling in and you had to change the government because we were approaching $2 a litre. It's now above $2 a litre, even more depending on what type of fuel that you put into your car. They've got extra money, but they wouldn't possibly cut you a little bit of slack. We're going to have Di Lee on the show tonight to talk about how this is affecting in Western Sydney and why people may well see the government for what it is, the government that took $1,500 off you when it came to the automatic support that was there in your tax return. The same people who have more money than even they can spend, yet they couldn't possibly carve off $3 billion to make it cheaper for the blood that runs through our supply chain, fuel, to become cheaper. What was that promise again? A Labor government will lower the cost of living. Watch what they do, not what they say.